Yeah, I'm Paul Schaefer.
I'm Will Lee.
And you are watching the Letterman Podcast.
La, la, la.
Welcome once again to the Letterman Podcast. My name is Mike Chisholm. Okay, we got Donick Cary. I'm very, very excited to have Donick on here today. Writer, he was an intern writer. Go to the Letterman channel and watch Donick Cary's staff favorite moments. Very, very good stuff. Some of those we touch on in this episode, but then a whole bunch more. And I mean, we really only scratched the surface today with Donick. Thank goodness it was a great experience, and he's going to come back. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things we didn't talk about today, but we did talk about it. Donick was, it's cool because he was a writer that came in as somebody who worshiped the show and was there for the end of the late night era into late show era, was the head writer with John Beckerman. We had John on a couple months back. And so it's neat hearing the bookends of some of these different stories that John talked about as well. It's very cool talking about that. Moved over to the Simpsons, has done a whole bunch of other stuff I really wish we would have gotten to more of, because he's got this crazy career. It's like 30 years in show business and has seen a whole bunch of changes, but really was there for a lot of just amazing, formative Letterman stuff. And it was just an honor to have him on today. The Letterman Podcast is happy to present Donick Cary. Donick, I am so excited to have you on here. Now, to tell some tales out of school really quick, you don't know that I'm going to say this. That guy right there, Rick Sheckman, who was my guy, he was the guy that kind of gave me I don't know if it was permission or whatnot to do this. And when we talked early, your name was on very, very, very early as the high, one of the guests that he thought I would love to have a conversation with. He thought you and I would get along really, really well, because I got my podcasting chops, if I have any, hosting my men's mental wellness podcast. My wife is building a men's mental wellness app, and she thinks that's her life calling. She wants to change the world. And your name came up because you have a project that's really, really close to your heart. And Shecky thought that you and I would connect on that level. Before we get going into you and Letterman and the transfer from late night to late show and then the Simpsons and all the other stuff you've done, can we open with that? Because I think it's really special.
Absolutely. And it's funny because there's potentially two things you're referring to. I assume it's one. Shecky mentioned it. First of all, thanks for having me. And big love to Shecky, wherever you are in the film archives in the sky. We hope it's good. And Jerry Foley as well, who we lost recently as well. All just some of the best people in show business. So
on the same day, a year apart. Isn't that crazy?
There's something going on. There's something going on. I have to believe there's a bigger purpose for all of that. I don't know what it is, but we send love to those guys and their families. Shecky. So there's a couple things in the mental health space for me. You know, I grew up on Nantucket Island, which is a very it's a weird place to grow up because there's incredible wealth disparity. There's a summertime full of very wealthy people, and there's a wintertime with working class year-round people who are trapped on an island for 9 months where the fog rolls in and everything shuts down. And you're like, if you want to go crazy, this is the place to do it. It's like The Shining, you know. It just gets weirder and weirder, and the harbor freezes and flights stop going, and you're like, wow, oh God. The serious side of that, you know, there's a lot of alcohol and drug use and a lot of teen suicide, and we kind of navigated that growing up. And there are a few things that for me, you know, really saved my life, and they were mostly comedy and music. You know, I would say, because it's on topic for us, you know, like I had a TV that I literally found at the you know what? I didn't find it at the dump. We had a dump where you could go pick stuff, but that wasn't where I got it at the thrift store for $5. It was a big old TV with the antenna ears, and I would wrestle those in and get the Letterman show at 12:30 at night and stay up in my room and watch it on this fuzzy box, you know, and there was like these transmissions that there's a bigger world out there, with people like Brother Theodore and Pee Wee Herman and Bill Murray and amazing bands stopping in, and just like a place for weirdos, you know. And I was watching all the NBC shows and the morning show as well. The other thing that really got me through it was music, and a lot of these bands and comedians would end up on Letterman. So you're like, oh, they're kind of part of the club or something. Dave is like giving them the approval, but that was like anyone from, Blondie and Devo to the Grateful Dead and Johnny Cash. And you're like, okay, they're part of the thing with Pee Wee Herman and Crispin Glover and whatever. So the quick story for this thing that I think Shecky was referring to is about 15 years ago, I started a music charity for my high school after there had been a number of teen suicides. And we were kind of going, what got us through this? And we were playing, we kept going back to music and sharing cassettes. And I asked the music teacher what was going on. And he said, I got 10 kids who want to play guitar and no guitars. And it was one of those lightning bolts. It was like, let's get guitars. That's so easy. I don't know about the bigger mental health thing, but I do know music can really help you. And so I set up a 501c3 that funded the Nantucket high school programs, but it quickly spread to a bunch of after school programs there. We started doing shows in the backyard, which you can kind of see out here, to raise money here in LA. And over the 15 years, we've had everyone from Rancid to English Beat to the Specials to Childish Gambino, X, Fishbone, Patton Oswalt, comedy, Kumail, and I, in a way, I guess now that we're talking about it in this context, like it's partly my own little talk show is like, I'll interview people and we'll do auctions and we'll show clips and we'll bring bands out. And it's a big celebration of music. All of that goes into kids' music programs, which have now spread across the country. We have programs on the Navajo Reservation, Pine Ridge Reservation, in Chattanooga, in Appalachia, in Cuba, in Haiti, and Aboriginal Australia. So love it. Love that we get to share music. Music has always been a big part of mental health for me, along with comedy. Those things seem to ride hand in hand.
What's it called? How do people look for it?
Sure, let's plug it. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's called Muzak, Musack, and it's muzak.org. You can check it out. We post about it. You can come to the shows. You just buy tickets, and you can donate. You can whatever. It's really a blast. I think a lot of the artists who come and play have found a way. There's this sort of what is the word? It's like it's just like a good cycle. You get it. You're like, oh, we get to play and have fun. And this goes to kids who get to play and have fun. And then sometimes the kids' bands come and open for the bands, and it's like everybody's passing it on. So it's awesome. It's awesome.
Those are experiences they will remember the rest of their life. In a time and place when our culture, our North American culture, because I'm Canadian, but it's happening up here as well, where the arts are just being marginalized, minimized, squeezed out in so many ways. What you're doing is literally being a light, a beacon in the darkness, and it's incredible that you're doing that. I'm a financial planner by trade, but a broadcaster. I didn't have that moment where I gave myself permission, like Dave, to drive from Indiana to California to take his shot and go for the dream. I'm going for the dream right now. Yep. And it's giving me fulfillment. My wife, in her men's mental wellness app, as before they even started with the app and whatnot, they started looking at pain points in a lot of particularly middle-aged men. And there's a lot of guys who are in middle age that just connected the dots that society told them to. They got the education, the job, they bought the house, they got the wife and the kids, but they still never went and did that introspective work.
Yeah.
You don't have to be playing for 30,000 people, but if you've got music inside you, you get yourself a guitar, you learn 20 chords, and you start exercising it, you start getting these things out, and it takes the pressure out of the balloon. Yeah. The fact that we have a society right now where kids are not encouraged nearly as much as, say, we were growing up to develop these gifts or find these passions and do it. The fact that you're a flag bearer for that, I think, is incredible, Donick. Thank you for doing that. That's awesome.
Thanks for kicking off with it. We love it. It's so fun. It feels like a ridiculous luxury that I stumbled into being able to do this and be a part of it, and the amazing people who help and the kids who when we get videos of them playing Ramon songs or whatever, it just makes me happy. So like, there's no downside. It's good work. And then another thing. Look, this is a weird one because it doesn't really feel like part of the Letterman universe, but it's definitely part of the mental health universe. But I made a movie based on this ties into Letterman a little bit.
Absolutely. Yep.
we used to do a thing on the Letterman show called Staff Stories, and it was basically like you'd sit down with Dave at lunch around a table, and it would be a topic or whatever. It's like,
Beckerman's Pizza Story is a good example of that, right?
his story. Here, I'll give you one too, because I was in one that got cut because it was too much of a summer spring break party movie, which was like the drinking and the partying for Dave was a little bit like, well, let's keep it, whatever.
Yeah.
We did one that was high school teachers, and we all brought in high school teachers. And now I was a pain in the ass in high school. I was a classic C student, a Letterman candidate from the get-go, class clown. I screwed around. I could not make sense of algebra, except like if people were laughing in the classroom, I was like, whoo, we don't have to deal with algebra, and this feels good. And but that was my mental health, was just like, I was kind of likening it to the first drug I ever discovered was like laughter. If I make people laugh, that is making me feel good. So
our own natural dopamine. That's the best drug there is.
It is. It really is. And I told a story about one night out on Nantucket. It was a half day at school, and we went to. There was somebody. There was a summer girl. That's what we, whatever.
Yep.
Who was visiting, and it was. And so she was staying at her parents' house, and they weren't there. So she had like keys to the mansion, and kind of we found out about her like party at this house. So we all went out to this house, and at noon, because we got out of school at noon, and we made margaritas for the first time, figured out how to make them in a blender, drank tequila all afternoon. This is sophomore year in high school, so whatever.
Yep.
And probably around 7 or 8 o'clock, things are getting pretty wild. It's pretty messy. It's getting a little, and we realize we're out of booze. We got to go try to buy booze at a liquor store on the island, which also is like, they all know us. Like, it's hard to like fake anything, but we realized that they had keys to the car, the summer car that was stored in the garage. We're right there. We're like, let's go. We're going to town. We're going to go buy booze. So I knew how to drive, didn't have a license yet. None of us had licenses. We're too young. And we've had a lot of tequila.
Yep.
We get in the car, and we're trying to take back roads. So we're down on a dirt road out near the beach, trying to wind our way past the airport into a liquor store. And the car dies. And we realize, oh, there's no gas in it. They basically drained it for the winter. And now we're just in the middle of nowhere, but there's a house right there, and it's a school day. It's a school night. I don't know how we got away with any of this, but everybody agreed, like, you look the oldest, go up and just ask if they have gas, and then we can get out, and then we can get the booze, then we go back to and I went up and knocked at the door, and I could see all my friends in the car, like looking out the window, watching. And our gym teacher, Mr. Webb, came to the door and was like, Donick? And I was like, oh shit. And clearly we were all drunk and smelling like tequila, and there's a car. And I turn around like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And all the doors open, and everyone ran into the woods, and just like, I was like, that is the dumbest thing. Like, obviously. So I just said nothing. All good. Thank you. And I walked away and left, and we left the car there. It got towed back to the house at some point. But the next day, of course, we were at school and had gym class, and Mr. Webb kind of like looked at us like, no one was hurt. I don't think I have to say anything. I'm going to let this go. Years later, I'm at Letterman to make it a staff story. We fly Mr. Webb in. We tell the story with Dave at the table. And Dave was kind of like, let's not do that one. But anyway, that's a long way of saying.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
You are one or two little tweaks away from having the plot to almost every 80s summer movie that we grew up with. That was
Yes, growing up on Nantucket was the fun part of it. Was you reenacted essentially every summer movie, including at one point, I love show business. I wanted my earliest memories are, first I want to be Charlie Chaplin, and then I was like, oh, I want to be John Belushi. Those were like the careers. I thought that's how you picked a career. It's like, I want to be that guy. And there was no, there was theater on Nantucket, but there was, like these little small theaters. My parents were in that, but let me know if the dog barking is a problem.
No, never a problem. Always a good thing.
The mail is arriving, which is about 5 minutes of chaos over by the door. So we'll see.
I hear nothing. We're good.
Okay. So we did have one movie, One Crazy Summer, came and shot on Nantucket. And it was like, oh my God, Hollywood's here. We had like one of the worst summer, party movies, but we snuck in the back, and we're as extras in a scene that was cut. So there's two stories where I was cut from things.
Yeah.
But the
Boy, do I wish that stuff could get released, by the way. I wish that they could
Yeah.
go into the archives and find some of these things. And I don't know what the legalities are of this thing. Like, I don't understand. I've learned a lot about the different unions and how certain things are a prop versus different departments have to do different things. When you have old footage like that, can Walter and company at the Letterman YouTube channel, can they release that? Or when in doing so they say they find that particular one that we were just talking about that was cut, do they now have to go and pay you and pay Mr. Webb if he's still around and do all that?
No.
Or are they allowed to throw that stuff out there?
I think that is probably, we signed a release that they own the footage at when they shot it, and they could. The bigger question would be, would that have been saved in any way? Because those remote pieces, we'd edit, get it in a thing, put it on the show. I think the thing that ended up on the show is probably the only thing that exists and is in the archives, whereas the raw footage and it'd be a miracle, but and amazing would be like the stuff we did with Rupert with the earpiece, where he'd go out in the cities. We shot hours and hours of that stuff and made it was in the era where we realized, like, oh, instead of 1 3-minute piece, we could actually make 3 3-minute pieces and run this through the show, which was genius. But that was still only about 8 minutes of footage from 2 hours of a lot of garbage, but there was still probably a half hour of really good stuff too, So yeah, I don't know if any of that exists. And there was so much great stuff in rehearsal too. I don't know if we ever rolled tape on that, Dave doing his prank phone calls during rehearsal and for the mic test and stuff. Anyway,
Shecky had a bunch of those, and he had, I think it was an hour's worth of those.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Some of them have come out. Like, a couple of them have been released, but I think they're sitting on a whole pile of them that can release every once in a while. And I mean, they're just absolutely hysterical. Like, it's just absolutely hysterical. And that was the thing that I think I loved. And I want to get into this with you. You're so fascinating to me because, like, I look at a guy like Rogalski. Okay, so Rogalski worshiped the show in college and then got a chance to be like that kind of that third wave of writer. You're a guy who got to come in, you worshiped the show, came in, got to be on a wave, and then you went and did what one of the first waves of writers did. You went to the Simpsons afterwards, and you became like another wave of Letterman writers on the Simpsons. That fascinates me, that you're this kind of second generation guy or third generation guy in a couple different ways. I want to know the progression that brought you from Nantucket to Letterman, because it seems to me like a lot of the people that were brought in were people from the Midwest. They weren't necessarily New Yorkers or whatever, obviously the Harvard guys, but I want to know the process of you getting from Nantucket to Late Night with David Letterman, if that's okay.
Yeah. So it's really just like, it's a miracle, honestly. It is one of these things that, like, I was young writers are always ask, you sit down and talk about, like, how do you get into whatever? And it's like, you look for those, part of it is hard work. Part of it is being good. Part of it is that the DNA is right and you can do this thing or lines up with the right show. But part of it is luck and timing. And when you see those little cracks open, is running through them as fast as you can. So what happened for me, one of the many summertime spring break movie type jobs I had in the 80s on Nantucket was running the box office at my dad's theater. He had something called Actors Theater. And I would deliver flowers all day, which was this great job where everyone loved you, and you'd go to celebrity houses and yachts, but you'd also visit all the stores. So everyone loved you. You're coming around with the flowers, and, people give you sandwiches and whatever. So I had a very, like, working the thing, what was the, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It was kind of like that. Like, every day I was like, what are we working? Oh, great. You got sandwiches today. Oh, here's some flowers. We got some extras. Anyway, that was fun. Then I'd roll into the theater. I'd put on a tie and a jacket. But I always would have shorts because I'd sit behind the thing. So I wouldn't have to, it was half dressed up, and manage the money for about an hour and a half. And then the show would start and I could go out and I'd either use the tie to sneak into some party downtown, or, sometimes you could sneak into a bar because you looked a little, anyway, beside the point. One of my jobs, I had this beat up old Buick Catalina that I had traded for a bag. I won't say what the bag was filled with someone who was working at the theater. And so it was like at best, the car was worth $50, and it didn't have any brakes. It was massive. And Nantucket's a very small cobblestone streets, very quaint. So this car would kind of rumble through these tiny streets, and I would have to coast to stops and hope there were like nothing, it wouldn't, whatever.
Yep.
One of my jobs was bringing some of the actors to the theater when I would go down there. And at some point, my dad had booked a dance troupe from New York, and they were in for 2 weeks, and I drove them down every week. And about halfway through the run, so I was very precocious. I'm in my tie. This is very like Rushmore, kind of
Great
I just
reference. Yeah.
talk to them like they were adults and be like, the bar you should go to, and they're like, what's this 16-year-old kid know about like where we should go, etc. But I just assumed I knew everything. I would tell me what you need. I'll make sure you have it, whatever. One of them one day mentioned, she's like, oh my God, my husband would think you're hilarious. You got to meet him. And I was like, okay, whatever. And then about 4 days later, this guy, Steve O'Donnell, came to visit Nantucket Island, and he was at my house, and I didn't know who that was yet. I came in, and my dad was like, you got to meet Steve. He does something you love, you enjoy every single night. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, who is he, Paul Schaefer? And he was like, no, he's the head writer of Letterman. And it's the first time I was thrown, and I didn't know what to say. And I was like, and I was really embarrassed and like, God, Dad, what's going, but his wife, Brooke, his wife at the time, was like, they have internships. You should go be an intern there, Steve, shouldn't he? And Steve's like, I don't know. Sure. He's a nice kid. But I was 16. I'm too young for an internship. But in my mind, there was one of these things of like, you can go work at Letterman. Like I'm there.
Light bulb moment. Yep.
So that actually was but you have to be in college. And I was like, I got to get into college. That was like why I applied and got into Boston University. I went to Boston University for 2 years, still with this thing of like, you could be an intern. And after 2 years, I had actually run out of money and was going to have to take a year off to earn money and go back to school. Anyway. And I was like, I'm applying, I'm going to send out, applications. I sent out one. The summer went by, and very late in the summer for the fall internship, I was like, oh my God, I don't know. They called and were like, oh, we actually had one of the slots just reopened. Can you come in? And I had been doing an internship in Washington at the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts that summer.
Wow.
I jumped on a train, and the next day was at Rockefeller Center, went in for my interview. Probably the same tie and jacket that I'd been wearing at the theater 3 years earlier. And met Kathy Mavrakakis, Michelson at the time, and she was very nice. Here's how the interns work. She's like, well, we have one more spot, and we didn't quite figure it out. Somebody just bailed out. It's with Ed Hall, who does graphics. And I was like, sounds great. I don't know, whatever job, I'll take it. And I went and met with Ed, and he was like, yeah, you seem like a nice guy. It starts in a couple of weeks. I was like, I'm here. So we scrambled very quickly. And again, my dad came through with, he had a friend from Carnegie Mellon that he went with, 20 years before, who is a working birthday clown in Manhattan. And this guy had lived at 45th and 9th all through the 70s, very taxi driver era,
45th and 9th. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Middle of Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah.
He was like, I still have an apartment there, but he now lives uptown with his girlfriend. And he was like, but it's empty. It's very cheap. Donick can stay there. I just have all my clown stuff there. So he has to be respectful or whatever. So I moved into this clown apartment. It was $325 a month. He gave me a few free months up front to get in the door, to get there.
Oh my God.
His act was that his name was Professor Putter. And do you remember the movie Capturing the Freedmans?
Yes.
So Silly Billy, who's in that movie, at the time was the #1 birthday clown. And I didn't know anything about birthday clowning in New York, of course. But Professor Putter would come get his mail at this apartment. He had all his gimmick was that he was a inventor who made wacky inventions. So there was like a butterfly machine with a thing and just stuff around.
Yep.
So this was a great find because it allowed me to live in New York for very cheaply and for nothing at Letterman. He would come in and complain about Silly Billy getting all the good gigs, which is funny. And then later I saw Capturing the Freedmans. I was like, oh no, that was the guy. the funny part of that was I worked at this place. It was the creepiest place to bring a date home, of course, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Clown, there's shag carpeting, mirrors over the bunk bed thing. It's very small, and a lot of clown stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple times. So the nice thing about being Ed Hall's intern was Ed was very like, help anyone. We need graphics like a couple times a week. You got to go over to the AP, pick up photos, run down, visit Bob Pook and Bill Shortridge, get the stuff, bring it up. So the rest of the time I was sort of the roaming intern that people could just send out for whatever. And a couple things happened there. The writers assistant Rogalski would often be like, get over here, help us get this thing or whatever. But sometimes the writers would call my apartment. And what would be the mortifying part of this is that Professor Putter's business phone was there. So the answering machine would go, boop, boop, leave a message at the boop. I mean the beep. Oh my gosh, there's a convention going insane here. Leave a message, beep. And then I'd hear, this is Matt Wickline. What the fuck was that? Like, look, we need you to go pick up 5 whatevers. Great joke there on the answer machine later. And I was like, oh no, like these guys think like I'm trying to be a birthday clown or something. That was mortifying, but fine. Survived it all. Yeah. I was going to tell something else about, so yeah, the fun part was like the first person I would work with. So Ed Hall was like a chain smoker and we had a tiny office. We'd sit in there and I'd file all the pictures and then go, go out and do errands for everyone from Laurie Leonard and was next door and Madeline Smithberg. And I'd help out the researchers. I'd help out the writers. Did Professor Putter ever get booked on the show? He was never on the show.
That's a lost opportunity right there, looking backwards.
I know. I was trying to be like, there's a part of this business that's like, look for the lucky moments and run to them. And then the other part is like, when you get in the room, just be cool.
Yes.
Like, so I was very aware that at Letterman, there was this vibe. I learned this actually on the first day from a Canadian intern who I was with. I won't name names. He was my first friend intern there. We went out to we had steaks the first night in Times Square to celebrate. But his mistake, I think, on that first day or within the first week, he went down onto the set and went right up to Dave. And you've probably heard this story because you're deep in this, but Steve O'Donnell tells it the best. But he asked Dave, "Who is the giant hot dog?" in his Quebecois. And Dave was like, "Wait, who the hell is this guy?" Because at the time we were doing a thing where Matt Wickline was a giant hot dog running around on a crime spree. So I could tell, and quickly this intern was removed from being able to go to the rehearsals, and I was like, "Oh, you got to just play it cool." So I was terrified to ever mention Professor Putter or get friends jobs or that my mother was in town or anything. I was just like, play it cool. The other part that I always recommend young writers is there was this other job that had to happen every day. Dave, whatever. I don't think this is like top secret information, but Dave liked to eat fresh pineapple every day. Yeah. And so that was a big part of it. And somebody had to go find this fresh pineapple. And I was there. Basically, I was an intern for one intern cycle. Yep. And then I was like, I'll do another one. And I just stayed for another one because I was like, I'm not leaving unless you kick me out of here.
Yeah. Or you're not leaving. You're waiting until you get a job.
Yeah. And whatever, I'm hanging out. So, I was always like, I'll get the pineapple, and you're out in the middle of February in like a blizzard or whatever, and going to delis and trying to find who's got fresh pineapple in the middle of the winter. No one. But if you come back with a non-fresh pineapple, in my mind, I was like, the show's not happening. I got to deliver. So, you whatever the job is, you go for it and do it. I got a lot of pineapples that year. And then as it wound down, like Ed and I got to be very good friends. His wife, was Liza Hall, who I got to know very well also, was working for Stu Smiley over at HBO just down the street. And occasionally I'd pick up something from Liza and bring it to Ed or vice versa. They had been pages together years before. And they became sort of like my protectorates within, as I was whatever, 19 years old and in New York, and I could always go to them for like, how do you get to the airport or whatever, I didn't know anything. And Liza was like, hey, we might have a job for you here as the internship winds down. And then it didn't quite happen. And I went back to Nantucket and was like, now I didn't earn any money. I got to go back to college.
Yep.
Took 4 jobs on Nantucket, started working.
Yep.
And 2 weeks after the summer started, Liza called and was like, hey, HBO is going to start something called the Comedy Channel. I work for this guy, Stu Smiley. He's the lead executive on it. And we got to hire people. We don't have anybody. It's just the 2 of us. And so they hired me as the second assistant there. I broke out the jacket and the tie again and went and had a corporate job there. And that was a place where it does quickly come back to Letterman, but we launched a we launched a channel, brought Bill Shortridge over from Letterman. I don't think there were any other Letterman writers or anything there, but it was this great opportunity because suddenly we were doing a whole network and they just needed material. And I was like, I got material. What about this? What about that? I learned a lot of stuff. I was able to put together a packet. I did sketches, so I was able to come back to Steve O'Donnell, who I didn't really work with that much when I was an intern, but I was able to come back to him and go, hey, remember me from Nantucket and also being an intern there. I've been working hard. Here's some stuff. And it was about 2 years after I had been an intern that he called and was like, hey, we got a spot for you. And I was like, woohoo, writing salary. And then he was like, well, writer's assistant. And I was like, oh, okay, but cool. So got back in the door still at NBC and was thrilled.
Okay, so a couple things. First off, you mentioned O'Donnell a couple of times. We got to mention him because humans on the planet who genuinely want to give people a hand up and at the same time will entertain the snot out of them while they do it. Steve O'Donnell is a very special human being. I'm so grateful to call him a friend and just a guy that will he wants to help everybody that he comes into contact with. If he's just one of the most helpful people on the planet, and yet at the same time, I mean, a genius, effortlessly genius. As a 16-year-old, you must have just been dumbstruck meeting him. You actually got a chance to work in the trenches with Steve O'Donnell. Let's talk about him just for a second here.
Oh yes, I mean, look, Steve is the whatever the lucky thing that happened in my life is he's somebody who says yes. He goes places, he travels. Like if it had been any other head writer, he probably wouldn't have come out to Nantucket to visit his wife. He would have been, I'm busy, we're running a show. So that's all incredible. He's one of the sweetest humans on the planet, as you said. He's one of the most hardworking people. He is also, as you said, effortlessly, or he makes it seem effortlessly, genius comedy mind, and not in a condescending, he has very high expectations. I was hired by him as a writer's assistant. Mm-hmm. He had, this is what we're looking for. We got to get the jokes up here. We need it to be good, but pushing you lovingly to be the best version of a writer you could be and the best version of the show that there could be, with all the constraints of doing network show every day and what guests are booked and what moods are in the building and whatever. It's like, it's the hardest job in show business. I've been doing this 30 years now. I'm like, that head writer job is the hardest job in show business. I kind of knew it working for him. Yep. And then I really knew it by the time I was head writer. I was like, oh my God. I've run shows, I've made movies, I've made cartoons, I've done other live things. Nothing is as hard as that gig.
I'm really glad that you made that comparison and that contrast. Thank you for doing that, because it shows scope. We could do an entire sub-series about the head writer portion of this and the grueling job that entails. The creative in you. So obviously you were the class clown in that sense. You loved laughing and all that growing up or whatever. When did the light bulb moment hit that you actually thought that you had a shot at being a creative in the business? Were you still the intern at the time? Was it the time moving over to the Comedy Channel that where you said, okay, no, I can make a decision. I'm going to do this. I'm not just going to be a behind the scenes guy. I want to be a creative at this.
I made like sketches and talk shows and videos. Like we had a video camera in the library you could rent out, and I took it out as much as possible and shot sketches and from an early age, and was always writing scripts and always making stuff. It was just like what I studied. I loved comedy. I didn't know I was studying it. I just consuming it, but like as soon as you learned about Steve Martin, I was like, what else can I get? More, feed me. What is Monty Python? Oh my God, there's all, and we didn't have, you had to work for that stuff. You had to like wait a week for PBS to broadcast another Monty Python. So you would like find a weird article or a book or, at the library that mentioned them, and you'd slowly, or records at the thrift store, you'd find a Monty Python album and then listen to it 1,000 times. Robin Williams and Richard Pryor and, whatever you could get your hands on. So I knew
there was no YouTube. There was no, even the video stores had nothing like that. Like one of the benefits of being Canadian is that, Kids in the Hall and SCTV were syndicated. You could see them, like they would run repeats all the time of these things.
Yeah.
I have American friends who are like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky that you got to see these things multiple times. And then of course the VCR helped with that. But yeah, it was a different time. Again, like being a researcher, same thing. We had researchers on the show. Same thing. It was a completely different time. And if you wanted to go deep into those things, you had to put out an effort to go deep. You had to trade tapes. You had to, put a lot of thought and like you say, luck into seeing some of these things so you could engross yourself in it.
It's funny. It reminds me of like one of the things I would do while I was in New York. We had a lunch break somewhere, like we'd have an hour in the middle of the day sometimes. And the Museum of Broadcasting was just up the street. They had archives with every Letterman show, every Monty Python, every I Love Lucy, whatever. And you just go deep dive stuff, and sit in there with headphones and be like, okay, so this is Steve Martin's first appearance on a talk show or whatever. So anyway, where were we heading? We were heading.
No. That was when you made the decision. So it wasn't it wasn't foreign to you.
The lightning flash to me was, I was in the graphics department, but observing the whole show and working with everybody. And I love that. And I was like, if I'm a graphics guy here, if Ed wants to retire, I would take this job in a second. This was like, I'm in the room, And then, but I really, like you'd walk by the writer's room and kind of hope they'd ask like, come in here and take notes or whatever. As an intern, I'd look in there and they were, excuse me, can I use the F?
Of course. Yeah, say whatever you like.
It looked like they were fucking around all day. And I was like, that's what I'm good at. And some of it goes on the air. And I was like, I can do that. So I studied how you professionally fuck around and turn it into real stuff that could be put on TV. The show was built for that, like the funniest things were things that seemed like they came out of, what if we put a camera on a monkey? What if we had a guy living under the stairs? Like they were just like goofy and weird and funny and kind of smart, but really stupid, love that. That just made you laugh out loud. So I think, when I saw like people in the writer's room kicking like a cantaloupe across the room and all laughing. And I'm going, that's a real job that people are paid for. Yeah. I'm just, turning everything, all my energy towards that. Yeah. Luckily Professor Putter had a typewriter in his apartment, and I would like try to type jokes and write sketches and, just be prepared so that if someone asked, I was ready to go,
That's fantastic. And it's advice for life that all of us need to continually take. If there's something, if you're not happy where you are, make the preparation to do whatever it takes that would make you happy. And then you are prepared for if a door does suddenly start to slide by you and you see that it's a crack open, you can kick it open and you can go there. I think that's
that's a note. I actually found, I was looking around for anything that might be of interest. When I was so I got in as the writer's assistant, and one of the first, you were encouraged, like submit jokes for top tens, write as much as you can, like see if you can find a spot here. And one of the first weeks I was there, we had to come up with a Christmas card, and every year there was a funny Christmas card. Now this is not for all the writers, they're like, oh, we got to do another Christmas card. Some of them had been there 5 years and had written 1,000, you write 1,000, 100 ideas for Christmas cards every year. So they're in like, all right, what's my 500th idea for a Christmas card? And I was like, oh my God, there's a chance to get the Christmas card. And that first year I got the Christmas card. This was the idea. It was a fake NBC News press pass that said like season greetings on the back. And now go to interesting places, meet famous people, and enjoy the free buffets. That was the card. I was like, I came up with the card. I was so excited. But that felt like, okay, maybe I can do this. Maybe I get the voice of the show. It's certainly, I've been studying it for the last, 8 years or whatever.
So I'm super curious about, you get the call, you're now coming in as the writer's assistant. Who's who's on deck? Who are the guys that are, or guys and gals perhaps, that were in the room at that point, that you're now this wide-eyed, writer's assistant at this point here, moving on to the next phase, wanting to be a writer? Who are the people that are in the room at that point?
Yeah, so you got some of the old guard, Jerry Mulligan, Steve O'Donnell, a writer, he's the head writer at the time. Steve Young is there. John Beckerman had just started. I can't remember if John started. No, John started a year later when I was promoted to writer. We kind of started at the same time as writers, but I had been there a little longer.
Spike there?
Spike was there. Yes, Spike was there. We were very, very close. He was like, Paul Sims was there. Let's see.
There's a guy who I wanna pick the brain of. Because of the Larry Sanders stuff too, right? Like, oh man, that's a.
I mean, Paul's elusive. Good luck, but
I know.
Fun to sit down with him. He's a very funny man. He was definitely like heading towards Larry Sanders during the time I was there, but we like late night video games and had some musical crossover stuff that we loved.
What games did you guys play?
Oh, I mean, he was playing what would he was up like until 4. You could drop by his apartment anytime, and he was up until 4 a.m. every night playing video games. And then he would come in and have his hood over his eyes and just be like kind of resting in the morning. And like,
was it like Sega Genesis or was it like Amiga computer type stuff? You remember the
like Sega Genesis, like first
Genesis?
Yeah. Which became a thing, like he by the time we were at CBS, I had a Sega Genesis in there with Madden on it, and we got pretty addicted. We had I think that's one of where Rob Burnett and I really got competitive. We're like we had to win the Madden games, and it was a problem because often it was like, we're gonna start taping it's 5:15 and the show starts at 15 minutes, but we're in the fourth quarter. And we'd squeeze these games in. It was high pressure added to high pressure. But yeah, let's see who else was there at the time. It's funny because I get a little blurry with like who was there when I was an intern. As an intern, it was like Fred Graver and Joe Toplin and Matt Wickline was there, and those guys had mostly moved on. But I think Steve Young, you've met a number of times, was a great role model to go like, Steve just works hard and is funny every day. Spike was incredibly funny and a little wild. We had a lot of fun adventures together. So got in there, and there were also, people like Spike who were up for like, I'm thinking about this idea, or I had an idea and I could go to him and he'd go like, let's write it up, and it was like this sort of we need
collaboration. It was a collaboration.
So
that's the thing I love about, and it's so funny the time you came in, Donick, it's like, as Letterman was essentially at his, the ascension had happened already. He was the hot, the it factor was at its zenith at this point here. And Carson's, the changing of the guard is happening as you're kind of jumping into the machine here. That's all happening. Like, you would have been there when Carson came on and announced to everybody what he announced at the upfronts, right? You were there at the time. Do you remember the mood of the room or the staff at that point? It's like, holy shit, Johnny Carson's retiring. What's going to happen? Like, do you remember that?
There was a lot of drama, a lot of excitement, a lot of I think we were pretty arrogant about but it's the writers who really matter in this whole thing, we'll decide if we're gonna take that gig or whatever, let's see what Dave does. We always saw Dave as a writer first, and that he was like, the comedy mattered more than the guest or whatever, but I think for him it all mattered the same, but in our minds, it was like, we definitely we were there at night every night, having takeout food, and we'd break and watch The Simpsons on Thursday nights. But we were also there kind of watching what meetings were happening in Dave's office at 8 p.m., 9 p.m. and who was coming and going and what was being announced. And we'd be, I think there's that Late Shift story about Jay Leno being in a closet listening or whatever. It's like, we were essentially doing that to every meeting. Like, the whole writer's room was kind of listening through the walls of I wonder what that lawyer is up to, or what that head of NBC just came down to visit him or whatever, But yeah, that was all really exciting. I think we all had chips on our shoulder that we thought and knew what we were doing was the best thing in the world. And,
Yep.
whatever decisions these pinheads upstairs are going to make are, they'll be lucky to have us or whatever. So, yeah, there's a lot of swagger around all that, but it was fun and great timing, like there was a transition. I had been the writer's assistant for a year, and then there's a transition with Rob Burnett taking over as head writer.
Yep.
And he was like, Donick, you're contributing a lot of material. I'll give you a shot. You still got to prove it because you didn't work for me. I didn't hire you, and we got to hire writers to go to CBS or whatever. And, it was great. I just started spending all day writing. I didn't have to open viewer mail letters anymore or whatever, and so Rob really opened the door to go like, just bring it on, bring in, as much as you can. There was
you took okay. No, you say this part, but remind me to come back to viewer mail. You say this part and then we'll come back to viewer mail.
Sure. There was a really nice moment after, it was clear we were heading to CBS and starting to renovate, get the Ed Sullivan Theater and this plan where we had a whole window at NBC. I'm sure people have talked about this, where it was like, Dave was like, let's just try stuff, which there had been a lot of years where it was not, let's just try stuff. It was like, we have to do the best new reinvention of the talk show every night. And it's hard to do every night, and sometimes you go down in flames and sometimes you come up with something amazing. That was a great bar to aim for, but also could be crushing. So there was this suddenly like, whatever, let's try stuff. And like an example of stuff, I wrote a thing called late night P-boy. And it was just like, intern to me one day was like, oh, he looks like a pea. Let's put him in a pea costume. And I wrote this thing up and they were like, great. And it didn't make any sense, but it made sense for whatever reason. And the kid would run through the audience and throw frozen peas and frantic music would play. And it was like, great. And then it was kind of like, all right, let's keep that. We'll take it to CBS. Then the next night, let's do something else. And we were kind of like stockpiling the good stuff to sneak out of NBC, and take over to
okay. I've wanted to talk about this exact subject for a long time. Another subject too is the fact that Lena was actually your lead-in at NBC for a time. There was a period where Lena was the lead-in. We've hardly ever talked about that, and we've hardly ever talked about this subject. We will come back to viewer mail in a second, but I really want to jump on this because you said it. I've heard this a lot, that you guys were stockpiling ideas and things that you were going to do to launch the 11:30 show on CBS and the things that you wanted to have. At that point, as writers, are you changing any sensibility whatsoever? Are you taking things that would have been small and making them bigger? Are you what was the sensibility of something that we're going to run on NBC just to try something versus, no, you know what, this is something that we want to maybe kind of keep in the vault for the reinvention or for the evolution?
Some of it's so much, there's so much of like, throw it out in front of the audience and see if it works. And you just don't know. So there's part of it is that where you can't over calculate too much. You got to just see if it's funny and if audience likes it. There was definitely awareness that we were probably absurd for absurd was probably like a later night thing, but weirdly like something like P-Boy, which to me would fit in that space, was like, oh, we're taking that with us because it was big and energetic and could fill a bigger space too.
Theater.
Like that kid could run through and throw peas through at frantic music. So it was like the energy was up. So that kind of fit. The other thing of mine that we weirdly like rebooted and took there, I did a thing. This is like the most obscure thing. I don't think anyone would ever remember it as, but it was called like, it might've been viewer mail. It was like, what are you most excited about, Dave? He's like, well, my upcoming show, Lenny, I think it was called Lenny Cubed. And it was Dave, Paul, and Anton in a new NBC sitcom on Thursday Night Funny Time is what I had written in. It's like funny time is Thursdays at NBC. And it was just about like, what if three Lennys all live together? Three guys named Lenny all in an apartment? That's crazy. And it was not really any joke, but we took it. We were like, that was great. Rob loved, I think Rob just, it tickled him, whatever. He liked it. So we redid it at CBS as Benny's, like they're Benny Cubed. And it was like, well, we avoided any,
I was just going to say, you're giving him a little gut shot to the
but I do remember that one playing huge at NBC in late night. And then at CBS being like, the audience kind of going like, where's the energy and the craziness? So there was definitely a difference. I think we wanted we wanted to go to CBS with as much, as much ammunition as possible.
Yeah.
You're burning stuff all day, every day. And we knew we had, I think it was 13 weeks of downtime between the two shows.
Yeah.
So we actually, for the first time, had a little time to stockpile stuff, shoot remotes, edit stuff, and build a armory of comedy. It was definitely an awareness that it was going to be different and bigger. It didn't really become clear until we were in that space shooting shows that like, oh, we can't get away with a small, subtle thing anymore.
Yeah.
And I was involved in a couple of these conversations. Like, I remember the first one where we had to really take it seriously is one of the crutches we got to, this is a time capsule at this point, but we had worked our way up to saying ass on the show, and like big ass beer and ass and falling on your ass and whatever. And it became a little bit of a crutch because the audience, if Dave said ass in any context, whatever the joke was in a top 10, if he just said number 4 ass, like didn't have to even relate, the audience would like cheer, like he was a genius, like we were the funniest. So it became this weird crutch where it's just like, and we had a very serious conversation. I can't remember if I was head writer yet or if Rob was, but we were in the room with Dave. So it was probably Rob, maybe Beckerman and me, and talking and going like, I don't know what we're gonna do. We got to stop saying ass for a while. We got to retire ass. Like really, we had occasionally there would be a very serious, assessment of something. Yeah. And ass was one of them. We were like, we're getting lazy. We're just saying ass. Like we're not doing a good comedy if that's all we're doing. And I remember we retired it for a while. I remember it was like, you're writing your top 10s and like, oh, I got a perfect ass joke, but I can't write it. We're not doing that right now. So
I can't, just as an aside, I have looked, I can't believe that there was never a time where there was a commercially available big ass ham t-shirt. Yeah. Like, to me, that's the perfect concert tee. That's the perfect, that is it. I can't believe that never happened. That merchandising. But anyway, go ahead.
All hail Steve O'Donnell. That was his genius. All of that was his genius. He brought it back. I think he was in New Orleans. We had a break and he came back from New Orleans inspired with this new idea. And suddenly it was like big ass ham, big ass beer, or maybe big ass beer is a real thing that spun off from it. But yeah. We were lazy with marketing. There were so many things that could have been like, now.
Oh yeah. But again, part of the reason why the show was so cool though, is because you didn't do that as well. Like that's the other side of that coin was kind of like you said. I mean, so many people who worked for the show in every incarnation of the show were massive fanboys of the show, but would play it cool. Like you said, it was that attitude that you had to have that, you don't bring attention to the fact that you're cool. And I think part of what we're talking about here, missed opportunities, quote unquote, were the things that actually gave the show the personality, the sensibility that it had was you left some things on the table because you could, and that kind of built the mystique of it.
Yep. Yeah. You're unmoved by celebrity. It's all like, okay, we're here to kind of point out how absurd all this is,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to go back just for a moment. There was a time where, and we don't talk about this enough on this show, there was a time where Jay Leno was your lead-in, where he got the Tonight Show. And now you guys knew you were moving on to Ovitz was doing his thing with Dave and all that stuff. You knew other pastures were coming. But that was the case. Was that ever a thing? Was that ever something anybody ever talked about where Jay saying stay tuned for Dave or whatever, stay tuned for late night? Was that ever a thing where it was weird to have Leno as your lead-in?
It's interesting. I mean, we certainly watched, we would stay and watch and sort of, gripe about how, in our opinion at the time, the Jay Leno show was very lazy and not up to the standards of the kind of comedy we were trying to like deliver every night. Yep. So there was that. But then there was the Chevy Chase show, which was like, oh my God, like we watched every episode of that. We couldn't believe what was happening, and it was sort of this, this wonderful treat of like, oh, we're going to work late, but at the end of it, we get to watch Chevy Chase, see what kind of train wreck they put together tonight. So there was a lot of like, I don't want to say it hate watching, but there was a lot of like, it made us feel better about like when we failed, like things went off the rails for us or whatever at a night. I will share quickly just a couple things from the writer's room. Please. At that time. There was something wonderful called, oh my God, what was it called? Oh yeah, Tub of Tea. So here's what happened is on, I think it was Thursdays, it might've been Wednesdays. Every Wednesday we get a bunch of Chinese food and it got to the room, there'd be, massive. The Chinese restaurant must have thought it was a banquet for 30 people. So they'd these plastic bowls filled with scalding hot tea for 30. So there'd be 30 tubs of tea on the table. And we started something called, it was this game show that we had within the writer's room called Tub of Tea. And the point of it was you'd start a timer and then everyone would shout, tub of tea. And then you'd take the lid off and the scalding hot tea, see who could finish it first. And everyone's like, it's just screaming and burning their mouth. And I remember Steve O'Donnell being very good at it, actually. He was able to scarf down tea faster than anyone. And there'd be like, everyone threw in a couple bucks. So it'd be like, you win $18 or something for burning your throat and esophagus and everything and winning Tub of Tea. So that was what was happening while we were waiting for Leno to go on at 11:30. So of course,
you said a couple things from the room.
Everyone's pretty pissed off by the time they're watching Leno because they're have third-degree burns in their mouth. The other one, this is probably grosser, but out of that became a fantasy game show that was called Bag of Piss. And I'm sorry, but it was the premise of the show, which probably we're now a few years away from being on the Fox network, was it was a giant bag of piss hung in the middle of the studio. And then celebrities would come out and sit under it and be grilled by a host, someone like Rob Lowe or whatever, who would grill them when they got something wrong. The audience would judge and then go, if they all shouted at the same time, bag of piss, they'd unleash the bag of piss. It would drop on the celebrity. And so
like the adult version of you can't do that on television or whatever with this group, the green slime.
Nickelodeon version of yes. If the slime was piss. There you go. Anyway, sorry.
No, and I want to go back to viewer mail here for a second because was that a gateway for you? Like, did you get to a place you knew the voice of the show, obviously, from all the different ways, as a viewer, from working for it, whatever. You're going through the mail. Yeah. And are you like, do they just kind of like, they're all black and white except for this one that's in color? I know this is going to be a bit for the show, and you're kind of that filter. Are you the guy like did you know the sensibility of what would be a good letter for on the air that would make a premise for some comedy gold?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of an art form and it was a little bit of exhausting because you don't know what you're going to open. I mean, there were, you'd open an envelope and out would ooze, it's like some kind of goo that somebody thought Dave would want. And you're like, I don't know what this is. Is this melted wax or what? So it was a job full of landmines and you're just like cutting open things. People would send full portraits that they had painted of Dave or pictures of themselves in bondage gear. We're like, show this to Dave, he'll love it or whatever. And you're like,
yeah,
you're filtering out a lot of garbage, but also a lot of hilarious stuff. We had at one point a wall of fan art of Dave that was great. I'm so sad that we didn't. I think Spike and I really took to that, and I'm sad now that I didn't keep more of that stuff because it was pretty amazing. And then yeah, you'd put together these packets for the writers, make Xerox copies of them of like, here's 20 letters. You'd keep the original copies of them in case they got chosen as part of the mail. And, depending on the writers, like some writers would get frustrated. This is when I was writer's assistant, but like some writers would get frustrated that they couldn't think of any jokes with the packet again. They're like, we need more letters. Where, so you were kind of in this thing, like, I got to find more letters. And there were plenty to go through. There were a lot that kind of lead to the same kind of payoff of like,
sure,
what's Dave's favorite thing this week or whatever. And you're like, well, that's too lazy. You got to have some other twist to it. But you also didn't know what a writer would jump off from. So you wanted to give plenty of, choices and stuff. And who knows, some of the best viewer mail responses came from the worst letters, and some of the best letters led to nothing, you know, or
Yeah.
whatever. So who knows?
Without getting into any scary letters?
You know, there's definitely like stalker vibes,
Yeah.
you know, within the, you know, there are things of like, oh, this person, you know, and I was a kid. I was there my time I worked there was 19 to 26 years old. So I was still like, I didn't know what bipolar was, you know, but like you're reading this stuff and you're like, this is hilarious, but maybe this is really sad. Maybe this is, you know, and some of the best comedy is at the edges of this stuff and being able to see the world through different things. But sometimes you're seeing it from a different planet, and maybe, you know, so you were filtering out, like you didn't want to encourage crazy too much, but you also, like, some of the best stuff we did was with real people and finding, you know, a way to include them in the show and celebrate the weirdness, you know. So there was a fine line, and that stuff was all, you know, wonderful and weird to explore. But yeah, you'd occasionally have things. There's like a lot of nudity in there and a lot of like, there were no, I don't think I saw any threats really. Like the way it's actually much scarier now that every day, if you're doing a show, there's a bunch of great tweets and there's a bunch of like, oh, somebody wants to murder me tweets. And, you know, we were aware, you know, we were aware of that Dave had fans who believed he spoke to them through the TV and were having private conversations with him that he wasn't actually a part of. So, you know, you're cautious of that stuff, and
you're cognizant of it, but you're obviously looking for the good stuff. The first thing you ever got on the air, top 10, it seems to be the consensus of everybody.
The first thing I got on there actually was not a top 10. It was this was this thing, like, as the writer's assistant, you saw things like the Christmas card and you saw how fatigued the writing staff was about it. And you're like, I'm going to go all in on this. There was a desk piece in Act 4. It was Act 4 at NBC and then Act 5 at CBS. I can't remember but anyways, Act 4, where you always had to have a piece ready to go midway through the show and then if the guest went long, that piece would be cut. So, you know, sometimes they mattered and sometimes they were kind of filler that you had standing by. And this was definitely filler that was standing by, and had been around for a couple, you know, like it ended up being around for a couple weeks, but no one was very excited about it. And I could see on this as I went around, because the writer's assistant would go around and hand out the assignments and go like, we need this piece that Steve's looking for, blah, 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 blah. And you could tell from their face, they're like, oh, okay, fine. And then I'd be like, hey, here's an opportunity. I could go write a bunch of these. So the piece was, I forget exactly what it was called, but it was for midway through the show. And it was like how celebrities, or how this heat wave in New York is affecting celebrities, something like that. And it was just going to be pictures of celebrities and then a joke prints out. So it was essentially a top 10, but it was a bigger than the top 10 because it had pictures, you know? And I wrote a bunch, and when the piece was rehearsed and taken to set, I had like 4 or 5 of the 10 that went to rehearsal, and then 4 or 5 of the 8 that were chosen for the piece. And I was like, I crushed this. I'm like winning this thing, right? And they were jokes like, you know, I knew what was getting on at the time and stuff too, and it was like, you know, now they seem a little hacky, but like Richard Simmons is wearing even shorter shorts. You know, that's how it was affecting him. And I think one of the jokes was like something about the Hulk. I can't even remember, but it was like the Hulk is I don't even remember what the joke is. But anyway, one of those jokes was number 1 in the piece. We got to, I had like 1 and 3 and then 4, you know, whatever. And the piece got on and Dave started it, and it had sat for a few days, and he finally did it. He was like, all right, I guess we're doing this tonight. He was not happy about it. You could tell. He did the first one, and it was a joke I wrote like, Richard Simmons, shorter shorts. Okay, no laughter. He kind of crumpled it up and threw it through the window. It's like, let's try another one. It wasn't my joke. And by the third one, so this is my second joke on the air, I guess, something like that, was like, Green Hulk, less roles for big green guys or something. I can't remember exactly. And he was like, we're not doing this anymore. I turned, threw it through the window, and I was like, I'm on the air, baby. This is great. But that
Call the parents.
That was the first joke on. I actually have here one of those blue cards. I'll share some stuff from this photo album at some point. But
I love this stuff. Yeah. Show and
when
tell
I
is
was
one of my favorite things on this thing.
when I was head writer, Dave has his blue cards. He's throwing
Yep.
them through. So that was my first joke in there. Towards the end of my head writer job, I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, I'm burning out. I got to move on. And before I went to the Simpsons, one night he called me over to the desk. He was so mad, but the music's playing and it's free. You're freezing and the music's really loud during the commercial break, so you can't really hear. And he's like, "Where this piece?" It was a similar situation as this first piece I had on, and I was like, "What do you want?" And he's like, "I'm all right." I couldn't hear him. He's like, and so he wrote on a card. I have the one blue card from the desk. He just wrote, no more. So that's my one big memento from the show. Like, we're just not doing that anymore, whatever it was. So that was sort of the beginning, and a good bookends for me was those blue cards.
I like that you had the forethought to take that blue card, to know that would be important. And
Yeah.
with the benefit of hindsight and perspective and all those things, because I can only imagine what it would be like to be in the hurricane at that point. We're going to get there.
Yes.
One of the things that people have talked about is Dave. You see this perspective perhaps more than anybody, because you came in fresh, seeing Dave still as a writer, then moving over to Late Show as things changed, and that's where the distance kind of started. Was it there, or was it at NBC where that distance started to be kind of created, and the culture of the writer's room, the culture of the show changed? Did you watch that literally happen?
I think there was always some of it, I think in retrospect, I think it's hard for Dave to be close to people, and it's hard for him to feel at ease and funny and good at stuff. If there's people, he's got to get to know you.
Yeah.
And so as as the turnover for writers was faster, and as we were doing, and there were a lot of new faces, it was harder for Dave to feel comfortable with more and more writers,
Right.
So, I had been around. I was lucky. I got to be in around Dave.
Yep.
When I was with him, we had laughs and talked about stuff that we like, and so he was comfortable with me, and there are writers who he'd be comfortable with.
Yep.
And so you'd get more responsibility the more, he was comfortable, and eventually like, oh yeah, Donick could be head writer because I'm comfortable, with that guy.
Yep.
The distance was like, he was also busier. There are more demands doing that show for him, I think, as far as the talent level was higher, the amount of network meeting and greeting and stuff he had to do. So there's less of like, noodling with jokes that he had time for. Now, I think it wasn't until after I had left being head writer that there was sort of, a little bit more of like, Dave doesn't have to be involved in every single joke. So I was still in the storm of trying to make that happen every day and letting Dave get his sort of like take on everything. It ultimately has to go through him anyway.
Yep.
But it was increasingly hard for everybody because of the time constraints, and then that adds to the pressure, the mood. If you don't have time to really look at something, then it's irritating that we don't have time, and that.
Yep.
So everything started to, compound a little bit that way, which was fine, but it just made it harder. I think my Dave tricks were there. There's I guess a couple things that are fun to share. There was a clock on, at I think it was like 5:05, Dave goes in and gets ready for the show, and you had to have everything approved by then. And often the top 10 was still being tweaked right up until around then. And so sometimes you'd be like, oh, we still don't have a number 3 or a 5, or Dave was like, hey, bring back a couple more and let's take a look at this. And then you're like, at 5 o'clock, you're trying to get in the green room. He's getting makeup and he's about to, whatever. But the song that would play is Radar Love by Golden Earring at that.
Nice.
And I don't know if he still likes that song or whatever, but that was his like get psyched for the show song. And as soon as you heard, dun, 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 are they Canadian, by the way? They might be Golden Earring. Might be
Oh man, I don't even know. Radar Love is big up here, and a lot of bands have covered it. It wouldn't be surprising to me if Golden Earring was. That's a song.
It was a funny and a bit obscure song even at that point. Like we were having the Foo Fighters on, and it was still like, showtime, got to play that golden earring. But as soon as you heard that beginning, like, dun, 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 dun,
Yep.
dun, I was like, shit, we're screwed. We don't have a number 4. I'm going to have to pick something. If it doesn't go over well, it's on me, so I still have PTSD about that song. Every once in a while, it'll come on the radio and you're like, oh, it's showtime. But the Dave trick, I had two, if you could make Dave laugh, you could usually get stuff approved. And I think the first time I really remember making him laugh was as head writer was, you would always go up to wait. There's usually people waiting to get in and see him and stuff. So sometimes you'd be like, wait, Peter LaSalle would be there to talk about something about the thing. Morty was there to talk about whatever, maybe some from the edit had brought up some video. So there's sometimes you're in line with 20, 5 people or whatever.
Yep.
And one day I walked up and no one was in the little waiting area except Dave. And he was sitting on the desk. I don't know what had happened, but everyone else had gone away to get something. And Dave was out there. And I walked in and was kind of startled, but said what I normally would say is like, so you're waiting for Dave too? You gotta get and he was like, huh? And then he cracked up and was like, ha, great. What do you need? And then I pitched something. He's like, great, let's do it. And I was like, damn, if you can make this guy laugh, you can get something approved to put on the show. But otherwise it's like, you're kind of in this like, make me laugh situation. We had a lot of laughs over the years. The other trick was always, I feel like maybe Beavis and Butthead was on every day, but there was one day was maybe there was a new one or whatever. I feel like it was Wednesdays and you knew that like, probably, maybe it was the one night Dave was available to watch Beavis and Butthead, but if you could kind of work in that like, oh, did you see Beavis and Butthead last night? He'd start telling you about the episode. He'd be cracking up. He'd be doing the voices and he'd be like, great. Yeah. So part of the assignment of being head writer was to make sure to watch that episode because you had to catch it on TV at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock, whenever it was, so that you could go back and forth with Dave about
you're in on it. Yeah.
how good the episode was or whatever. So anyway, those are the tricks. I don't know if he still loves the show, but that's good advice.
Well, so I want to know what head writer did to the creative in you. Did it, because I mean, at the end of the day, you're this guy that has all these concepts, these ideas, the voice of the show. And then suddenly you've got to take that knowledge of the show and whatnot and kind of turn off the creative side of you. Was that difficult?
Yeah, it's funny because it was always called head writer. And then I realized later when I did other shows, like, oh, you're show running, you're running the show, that it's really complicated. And there's a whole bunch of departments that depend on you having the information of what's needed to make this thing happen. And it's not so much that you don't, I would say the hardest part of it is that you just don't have time to think about the comedy the way you did when you had all day to sit in a room and think of bits.
Yeah.
And
no time to push the cantaloupe around.
No, yeah, exactly. And it's like you're also now wearing 5 hats of like, every time you sit down to think of an idea, like, oh, but then wardrobe's going to need this. And oh my God, like we have getting a horse in here. I know how hard that is, or the budget for this is that, or, last time Morty was kind of like prickly about us, blah, 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 using blah, blah, blah. I know Dave hates this because he rejected that joke and this other thing. And you're kind of managing all of these things. So the perfect comedy didn't have to do with what's the funniest thing or the freshest thing, which always was the job as a writer. And it was like, what's the thing we can get on tonight, given the situation, and be the best version of this show that we can do, actually pull off, given knowing what everybody in this building is up against today.
Yeah. And you got to watch those extra filters be added to dilute, the everything's being thrown into the machine. Well, you're during your tenure there, you saw 3 or 4 extra filters get added.
Yeah.
And it did get more complex. It just did. It went from simple, in many respects, to a lot more complex. Did you go on a lot of remotes?
Yeah. Love remotes.
You love remotes. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about some of the remotes you went on.
Yeah. So some of the funnest thing, one of our jobs by the time we were at CBS was like, how do we let Dave be funny Dave, when he's now so familiar and people are just like, yo, Letterman, top 10, like everywhere you went. So that was like one of the, I think probably the thing that Beckerman and I thought about the most together, or at that time,
Yep.
was just like, how do we disguise this so Dave can just be like the way he would do a prank phone call? No one would know it's Dave, and now he can just do whatever he wants. So coming up with the Rupert, and not that I came up with it exactly, but like
No.
Rupert headphone, and then being like, all right, now we're sitting in a car with Dave just throwing out jokes. He can say whatever he wants because Rupert is what people are seeing. Driving, the Taco Bells and doing the drive-throughs was another way that it's like just Dave on a microphone. They don't know what idiot they're dealing with. He can still be an idiot, and then finding proxies too, where it's like, can we sending Sarah Jalamujabar, sending Dave's mom somewhere, and then making sure that those people were capturing the essence of how the show would interact with people, by proxy. So all of those experiments, and that was really like kind of in retrospect to me, like experiments in reality TV, we're like, what's it like to make someone random a star? What's it like to put comic, devices on them, like the way the Osbournes would do later. It's like, oh, this is a sitcom, let's just shoot that. It's like, what if these guys were travel hosts, but they don't know what they're doing. I loved, one of my favorite remotes was, I'd have to watch it. I haven't watched it in forever, but was like part of, partly because we knew Dave would hate it. So it was like threading this needle, but was like, he had lunch with Dave lookalikes. And this was like a piece I put together and begged for, and then found the right moment where he agreed to do it. And we had 5 guys who looked like him come in. Some of them like played birthday parties, and some were just like, hey, look at my friend, he looks like Dave, and sent in a picture to viewer mail,
Yeah.
So he had, this is the most uncomfortable thing for Dave. Like he's like, each of them had some characteristic that was accentuated, like they had a gap in their teeth, but it was huge, or whatever. Yeah. So it was like, oh, they look just like Dave, but they didn't quite, they looked like a ridiculous version of Dave. And then he had to sit and talk with them, and all of them had stories about the burden and or joy of having his likeness on them. And it was kind of wonderful and weird, and watching Dave be up for it, but also squirm a little bit of how uncomfortable he was. Like, that was one of my favorite things to put together.
Okay, I want to go back because I think that there'll be some edification here. I remember when that episode came out, and I loved it so much because there had been an episode of, I think it was Oprah. It might have been like a Sally Jesse Raphael, but I'm pretty sure it was Oprah, where she had like 5 people on who looked like celebrities. One of them was Jerry Seinfeld. I remember that one very specifically. And within a couple of weeks, it felt like you guys did your take on this this premise, and it was fantastic because it was given that Letterman spin to it. And I just remember as a viewer absolutely like being floored and loving that segment. Like,
amazing. I don't remember the Oprah one at all, but definitely, the area of celebrity lookalikes was a little bit of a corny.
Yes.
And it was always like, what do we do with it? What's our take? How do we how are we okay with this or whatever, and it became kind of clear. And then one of the guys, we looked so much like him in the worst way or something that we were like, we came up with the idea of bringing him back. And this is like, I don't know, he lived in Montana or something, so we'd have to fly the guy in. But one night we did an act 4, and I wonder if this ever aired, because Dave at that point was like, oh God, the guy's back. This is uncomfortable. But we did an act 4 where we came out of commercial break and had removed Dave and put the lookalike in his seat, where he just said, all right, coming up on the rest of the show is this, and my guests tomorrow are this, and we'll be right back after that. And then we went to the next commercial, put Dave back in, and we're like, didn't ever mention it, that there was like a...
we got to find that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that...
Dawn, when you watch, we gotta figure that out. We gotta find that. That is really, really great. Oh,
let's beg Walter for that.
Absolutely. That is okay. That's a great moment. By the way, thank you for reminding me of great moments. I'm like a dog on a bone when it comes to certain things that I've heard of. So one time Rupert and I are talking, and we're just going back and forth, and he's telling me about this time in LA. And he's telling about this time in LA where the vans were stopped. He was in the second van, of course, and they were stopped in an inordinate amount of time. And there was chatter going back and forth. And it was chatter whether they were going to send Rupert out. And I don't know who was all in the vans. I think Walter was in one of them. And it was because Leno was over there. And it was like, are we going to send Rupert over to bother Jay Leno or not?
Yes.
To me, if you look at the potential of a Wayback Machine, that is probably one of the greatest moments that could have happened that never happened, because you guys would have had the last laugh. You guys would be able to have Rupert on the couch talk about it afterwards, even though it was on both shows. Were you in the van for that? Do you remember that moment at all?
That sounds right. You know, we had this magical thing happen where we were shooting a piece that I had come up with a premise, and we had done it a couple times in the show. That was Dave thinks the show's over, and then he leaves in the middle of the show, and then Paul has to go get him.
Of course.
And find him. And the first time we did it, he was at the penguin cage at Central Park Zoo, and it was just like, oh, that was a weird version. And then we started doing it more and more and more with like bigger and bigger things. So when we did the LA shows, we were driving all over, and we were on the Radford lot here, which was Roseanne, Larry Sanders, Seinfeld, like everything was shot there. And I know we did Roseanne. So Dave is missing and Paul goes to get him. And so we were recording Paul running across the sets of other shows and having quick interactions. And we had approved a thing with Seinfeld. So we were there to shoot that. But while we were there, we were looking around, and there were a bunch of other people around. We're like, oh, let's see if Roseanne would do one. And they were like, sure. And they were all shooting their show, and they let us have Paul run through. Excuse me. I can't remember. I think there might have been a Larry Sanders.
There was. Oh yeah, there was. Larry Sanders was definitely one of them.
So that was happening. And so in my fuzzy memory, that same van of people also was like shooting Rupert remotes, and the Florence Henderson remote was during that time. We had just an incredible week of shooting. Every day was some other bizarre thing. And yes, I seeing Leno, and having the like, oh, we should fuck with him impulse, but also Dave ultimately being so classy about all of that stuff, and just like we're going to rise above that. We don't mess with that stuff. And I mean, that was a big lesson for me always in showbiz stuff, like certainly there's things where you're like, someone stole a joke or that show, or I developed it, or, and it's just like rise above, you just let it go, do your thing. Dave had a great talk show career despite Jay Leno. It doesn't matter. He doesn't have to be mad about Leno anymore. You know what I mean? My experience with that was, we had this part of our Letterman DNA was to like hate the other guy, and we have to win the late night talk shows. And, the media fed that. And so a lot of it came down on like, oh, Jay just sniveling and just like he says whatever they want. Now, the other thing that happened to me was just as I was head writer, Hugh Grant went on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and the ratings shifted over to the Tonight Show. So there was a little bit of like, a lot of the first discussions I had with Dave as head writer were like, why are our ratings down? What can we do? What's wrong with us? Why aren't we as funny as we were a month ago? And I was like, because Jay had a Hugh Grant on who went to a prostitute. How do we get someone who went to a prostitute? Like, it wasn't really about Dave or the comedy or the music or the guests. It was nothing. It was out of our control, which was also very, very tough for all of us. Like you want to be able to. So I was trained to hate Leno, and then also Leno booked this guy and talked about and that made my job so much harder. Anyway, flash forward a couple of years, I was at the Simpsons, and I wrote an episode where it's not Krusty gets canceled. It was Krusty tries out insult comedy. Basically, it's like his act is old, and he's trying out insult comedy.
Is this where he like started becoming George Carlin? No, that was the one where he became George Carlin.
Yeah.
Was it that one? Oh, I love that one. That's a fantastic classic Simpsons episode. That was one of yours. That's fantastic, Donick.
And as part of it, we wanted a host for this comedy festival that he's going to go on and try to be more authentic and tell real jokes. And David kind of tentatively through channels agreed to do it. And I don't know how, this is like, I don't know if this is a big deal or not a big deal. So in the cone of Letterman silence or whatever.
Yeah.
But like it looked like Dave was going to do it. And we had written the show version for Dave. And then he at the last minute couldn't do it for whatever reason. I don't know. And, the Simpsons usually takes 9 months to animate it. So it's usually done way ahead of time. And then we were like, oh my God, it's not Dave. Who are we going to get? And Gary Shandling was stepping in, but then Gary couldn't do it because he was like doing a tour of Japan or something crazy. And so it wasn't going to be him. Or like, what about Seinfeld? We started to panic. And I don't remember how close it was to air, but it was like 30 days to air, which at The Simpsons is like 5 minutes to showtime. We were like, we got to call Leno. And I was like, no, I can't. We can't do that. That's going to crush me. And they're like, Donick, we got to call Leno. Sorry, dude. And Mike Scully, who was running it, called Leno, like whatever, got through. And the answer had, I remember this being on speaker, but he explained the bit. And then Jay was like, sure. Yeah, I can do it. How about tomorrow? And I was like, oh, he's so easy to work with. And I went over to the Tonight Show and I watched the show and I waited for him. And then he's like, hey, nice to meet you. Oh, you work with Dave. I love Dave. Like, he was just so nice about everything. Yeah. He recorded it. Do you want any more jokes? Can I sign anything? I mean, it was like easy. It's okay. But I had to appreciate Jay. It was a tough turning point in my career. I was like, he came through. He did the episode. He was funny. I got to give him credit. He's a Massachusetts kid like me.
Well, and the perspective of it's fascinating talking to some of you guys, because there are some that are still staunch, like hardcore, like some that are just 100% still entrenched in that opinion, and then some, of course, have gone over and spent years working for the Tonight Show. You've got the exact opposite as well. You look at a guy like Ed Hall, and it's fascinating talking to some of the people that are in the middle, some of the people that have kind of changed the opinion as time has gone by, and kind of the perspective of hindsight, zooming out a little bit on things does help a lot. It's really it was such a fascinating time in entertainment history at that time. Again, kids today don't realize. I mean, we got a taste of it in 2010 again. When with the rise of Team Coco and all of that. So we did get a tease of it in the modern age, but people just don't realize that this was the top story in entertainment, in all of entertainment at that point. And
look, the night we launched on CBS, the amount of press coverage there, and I threw out a joke that got on. We were like, we had Paul Newman, we didn't know what it was. Yeah. We weren't sure what he was going to stand up and say, and I threw out, where the hell are the singing cats?
That's yours. That's your line.
Like, yes, let's use that. And we did it. And the next day it's like, where the hell is headline? And I'm like, oh my God, anything we say is like, USA Today, like Paul Newman, blah, blah, blah. It's like everything was under that kind of scrutiny. And also, by the way, USA Today was in every hotel and everywhere at the time too, which is interesting. Anyway, let me give you.
I'm in Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, and every morning on the Lizard radio station, 104.7, David Letterman's top 10 list from the night before.
Amazing.
Like it was everywhere.
So we can't miss talking about Dick Assman also, just because our Canadian superhero.
Thank you. We get a lot of folks who have had encounters with Dick Assman before he passed away. We get a lot of people telling Dick Assman stories here.
Well, I was a big part of making that happen. That was certainly like you're always looking for comic gold that is also just fun and fills hours of airtime, and it was kind of just a dumb ad. Well, you've heard the story, you know what it is, but I ran with it. I was like, let's get Joe Namath. Let's shoot a commercial. Like, we shot that thing with Joe Namath. When I was at The Simpsons, like, we got to get Joe Namath. We brought him back and he was in an episode I did too. Cause I was like, Joe Namath's probably the most underrated, funniest guest star you could have on anything. But yeah, we pushed for getting Dick Assman to drive across country, all that. Hey, let me share a couple things. I'm looking at a random photo album here. This was like the first viewer mail letter I wrote was Dave was like, what's the best thing you've done with potatoes lately? And he's like, actually, I discovered something this afternoon. He puts a bunch of mashed potatoes on his head, goes down to NBC payroll and collects Phil Donahue's paycheck. So that was a bit. So the first real work I did with Dave was having him put mashed potatoes in his hair, which could go in any direction. I wasn't sure. Mm-hmm. Here's a good one. This is me and Spike with Orville Redenbacher and his grandson Gary.
Oh my gosh.
We played it cool and didn't bug anyone unless it was someone amazing like Orville Redenbacher.
Yep.
Here's two other odd ones. This is Jack Rollins' last day. It says so that is, we had Spike and I had this monkey mask there was something called Bad Monkey who would sometimes invade the office. So Bad Monkey got on Jack's desk in his last day before Jack came into the office. That was his kickoff. And then
we'll send that to Hillary Rollins. We've got a connection to Hillary Rollins through the show. We'll send that to her.
That's a sweet. That was our tribute to Jack, who we all revered and admired and couldn't believe had done we were like, he did Woody Allen, now he's here. And I'd have a wonderful conversation with Jack in the hallway once a day or a week, whenever he'd come in with his cigar and doing his thing. And you just ask him about one piece of showbiz history and he'd rattle off the most amazing stories. Here's one other one. This is like another piece that didn't ever make the light of day, I don't think. This was a viewer mail letter I wrote when Catwoman came out. And so we had Larry Bud Melman as Catwoman. I think the bit was that he had auditioned, but he kept screwing it up because his nails were too long. And I think the bit was he stabbed himself and then blood was shooting out all over the thing. And he's like, I'm Catwoman. Help me. So that's what that was.
Okay, I need you, if you wouldn't mind, and I'll say here, please take a photo of that and text it to me. I think we just found the thumbnail for today's episode.
Okay.
That is incredible. That's just precious.
Yeah. Let's see if there's any. I'll give you. See if there's one more.
Orville Redenbacher. There's an icon from again. This is one of those things where, folks who like to look back, and thank goodness we're in this culture that does like to look back, and time capsule things. Orville Redenbacher. That's an institution in the 80s right there.
Here's a couple like examples of viewer mail that like for some reason I hung on to. I'm not even sure why. This was this was oops, these all fell out now, but this is junk mail that for some reason ended up in our inbox. It was from a solicitation from Who's Who in Black America to Garrett Morris, for SNL legend Garrett Morris. Came to our mailbox. I was like, that's incredible. I don't know why I kept it. I have that. This is like a classic. Like what viewer mail would be full of. This picture is, I don't know why I kept that one, but this is
somebody
called Miami Mike. I don't know if he's still alive or his kids are out there, but he would stick glasses to his face and was like, I want to be on the show, so you'd be weeding through that kind of stuff all the time.
Here's my stupid human trick. And it's just so off kilter, but hilarious in its own regard.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
That is fantastic.
Here's one from just for fun, if anyone cares. That's like the offices at Ed Sullivan when they were stripped down.
Yep.
And we did a little visit over there. There's Beckerman and Spike and who else is there? Steve Young.
Wow. Looks like somebody's wearing a pair of Jordan 5s there. They're glowing, those shoes, whatever they are.
Yes.
Okay, Donick. Okay,
I'll give you one more.
Yes, please. Oh, we'll take it.
Talking about some of them being sketchy.
Yep.
That's like a Rodney Dangerfield guy, half naked. I get no respect, like an impersonator. I'm not sure. Doug Dangerfield is what he's called there.
Well, Doug, you got respect today, sir.
That's just a taste. That's a small taste of some of this stuff.
It's so big. I'm glad we've gotten to know each other. These first episodes are fantastic because we get to know each other. The next time, please come back on the show. What do you got there? What is that?
The legend, Pete Faravich. This was some photo shoot like that we needed him for a graphic. So I ended up with 7 photos of Pete Faravich.
When we had Morty on the show, one of the things I like to do sometimes is just throw a name out there and give me a sentence or two. And I had 10 of them for Morty, and Pete Faravich was on that list.
Totally.
Again, we could do this for hours, Donick, and just please come back. The idea of having you and Beckerman on would be fantastic. At the same time, I love that. But I do want to talk about this because again, another unique standpoint. The thing about Letterman that I love so much, early Letterman, is that it was laced with old showbiz, but also with like the new cutting edge or whatever you want to call it, for lack of a better term. And then the weird or whatnot. But the reverence for certain things in old showbiz, Jack Rollins being one of them, Hal Gurney being another one, and some of these, did you see any of that? Did you have any of that reverence? Like, do you have any good Peter LaSalle stories or anything like that, where some of these old school guys who would pass their wisdom on, similar to what you're doing now, you're passing on wisdom to people that are coming up now with these little tidbits that you're throwing out there. Was there any of that you
Yeah.
that impacted you?
I mean, you could feel it all around you. You're in 30 Rock. There's the nightly news downstairs. There's SNL upstairs. Like there's all the morning show, the Today Show. There's these institutions, that you feel like, oh, you're part of, but you also feel like part of your job, at least in the wave I was in, was I'm supposed to be taking what Dave taught me and thumb my nose at this stuff and make fun of it and how bloated and ridiculous a lot of this is. And for me, as a teenager watching, The Tonight Show to me was so just like, oh my God, what are they doing? This is so boring. Now, a lot of the writers who I was working with loved that and revered that.
Yep.
I understood I like that this is an institution and there's respect, and certainly meeting Johnny Carson and everything, you're like legend. Incredible.
Yep.
We had a funny thing at a staff party, Emmy Awards, they'd fly the whole staff out and we'd be in LA and we'd have this one big dinner. And Johnny showed up one time and bought the dinner and just happened to be passing through. He didn't stay. He just walked in and was like heading to Dave's table, but saw me. And I don't know why he thought he knew me. I think he thought like I was Kevin Meaney or somebody. Like, I think he thought I was a comedian or something. He was like, hey. So before he went to Dave, he came over to me. I stood up, he shook my hand. I was like, this guy. And then and maybe he was doing a joke. I don't know. But everyone was like, holy shit, Johnny. Anyway, it was like the weirdest. And I think I was still the writer's assistant. Anyway. But yeah, I think it was an interesting mix of love the ceremony and the bigness and the respect of all this, and certainly take Dave's cue about but also we're here to make fun of it. Yep. And that's what I did in high school. And that's why I was hired here. And also, I mean, that sort of guided me also through my career with projects too, it's like, where can we, Simpsons clearly was made to make fun of, this era of American excess and moment in American history. Yep. I did Little Bush during the George Bush administration because they're like, this is ridiculous. What are we going to do? There could never be a presidency as crazy as this. And
then the universe rolls up its sleeves and says, oh, you wait. Let's
see what we can do.
You haven't met Junior yet. Never mind everything else.
Right. But that is part of the job of comedy is to deflate stuff, help us laugh at ourselves, and bring us, equalize us a little bit so we listen to each other ultimately.
Yeah. I want to be okay. So I've got a million more questions for you. And I want to be honoring of everything. I want to be honoring of especially your time more than anything. So let's just say that some of these questions are going to be for part 2 whenever we decide to do part 2. Right. But at the same time, I also want to ask you what you're doing right now, Donick. What are some things that you're working on now?
Sure. It is a very, very weird time in Hollywood right now. I'm actually flying up to Toronto on Tuesday to shoot the cold open for a documentary I made called Hail to the Breadsticks, which is an exploration of my favorite football team of all time, the Washington football team, which eventually changed their name. But when my son, who's 15 now, when he was 8, we're in our game room full of memorabilia and stuff. And he was like, hey, is this racist? And I was like, and I started to say a bunch of stuff that the team has said for years of it's not, we're honoring natives. They don't care. Da. And I was looking at my 8-year-old. He was essentially asking, what is racism? What is the nature of racism? You try to teach your kids stuff rather than just feed them whatever you've heard. And so I asked him really what he was looking for. And he was like, he came up with this idea. He was like, who you should ask is we should ask real Native Americans. And I was like, he said the R word, which part of the movie is exploring what that means and stuff. Anyway, this was before the culture wars blew up, any conversations about Confederate statues and stuff. So we started an exploration of how do you actually talk about this stuff that is sometimes difficult, that you're defensive about? I certainly don't want to root for a football team that oppresses other people, but is that really happening? Is that crazy? I don't want to overcorrect.
Yes.
So we sort of went into this with humor and humanity and some lightheartedness, but met 200 plus Native Americans and got a really interesting perspective on not just football teams and mascots, but invisibility and representation and history that and don't know. And we're finishing up. So we're coming up to Toronto to shoot a cold open with Graham Greene next week. So that's one thing.
Fantastic. Where do you have distribution on that? Do you know where it's going to be
No.
available yet? Okay, yeah.
No idea.
Okay,
If
so
anyone
keep our
knows
eyes peeled.
how to distribute that, or if Canada CBC wants a piece of it, please call me. We have no idea how to get this out in this market right now. It is madness out there. But we do want to get the word out. I think part of it was we had fun. We learned a lot. And the people who were involved, we ended up hiring a lot of Native Americans, have producers, making shorts with them. Like we want them to be heard. That was sort of the point of this, is like, let's get the word out, and we actually edited in Canada and interviewed a lot of people with Canadian Indigenous backgrounds and stuff. So anyway,
have you heard of Super Channel up here?
No, I don't know anything. So something to think
weird.
about.
This is weird. I might have a guy. Okay. Great. So please remind me. I think I got a guy.
Okay.
Weird.
Then I have a pilot at Netflix, an animated pilot called Last Wish. It's about a genie. Zach Galifianakis is doing the voice. It's fun. We'll see. We're fingers crossed we can navigate the system and get it on. We're sort of. And then another pilot I have a thing that looks like it's going to be at Fox, but the deal is taking forever to close and et cetera. And we're shooting part 2 to loop way back to the beginning with mental health and this documentary we never mentioned, Have a Good Trip.
Thank you. Yep. It's so good. It's so good.
Adventures in Psychedelics, which really came out of staff stories, was like, oh, if you sit down and talk to a bunch of people, then you can do reenactments of the stories. And I thought, hey, this is a pretty funny area. No one talks about their psychedelic experiences in public. But I could really bring those to life with animation and reenactments like we used to do with the, staff stories.
Yep.
I started interviewing celebrities. We put on Netflix. It's great. So we're working on shooting a part 2 for that. And we're not sure that it would end up at Netflix or not. We almost think it'd be more valuable maybe for us to take to direct to consumer. But that's another, like, in a world where show business is morphing and changing, we're up for partners if people want to come in and help us make that. We've done about 30 interviews with people. We feel like the next chapter, the first movie was really about like how psychedelics got so stigmatized.
Yep.
Why after school specials were, adding to this hysteria and the drug war, but, comedy and using celebrity stories, but hinting at there might be more here. The second movie is, let's use celebrity stories and comedy to talk about the next 50 years. The last 50 years were this. What are we going to do? How do they help mental health? How can they be used for PTSD? How can they fight addiction and be used in treatments for stuff? What are good versions of going to a shaman? And what are versions that are either like ridiculous or you're going to hurt yourself?
Or a scam. Yeah.
Or a scam, or like what kind of ketamine should you be ordering over the internet? Should you, so we're having fun with actual information and have also now met in the couple years since we did the movie, everyone from MAPS and lots of veterans have used psilocybin and incredible transformative stories, but also mistakes that people have made. And so we're working on part 2, which would be kind of that of like, let's dig into it.
That's amazing. And you're making the world a better place, and doing it in a way that makes people laugh, which is super, super cool. I can't wait till the next time you come back on, because I have so many more things I want to ask you. Donick, thank you so much for your contribution to, again, this is our show. It's we're a celebration of the greatest body of broadcast work in history, that of David Letterman and Company. You are an integral part of the company, in a very integral part of when the company existed. And so thank you very much for your contribution, and thanks for giving me some of your time today, Donick, to be on the Letterman Podcast. This has been so much fun for me.
Thanks for lifting up this stuff and keeping it alive. We had so much fun making the show. It's super, super fun to relive some of that and always strive to the level of excellence that I think the show represents.
Absolutely. I'm going to do a really quick outro, and then we'll say our goodbye privately, if that's okay with you.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, so holy smokes, that's. Again, this is why we do the show. I say it every single time. It's uncovering these little gems, these little nuggets, these little stories, the stories behind what we got to see, but also re-examining some of these amazing jewels that were mined that had looked at for a second, thrown aside, and they continued to mine. That's why we do this show. We have one sponsor only at the Letterman Podcast. That is hello-deli.com. Rupert may not own the deli anymore, but guess what? There's one place that you can get official Late Show with David Letterman merchandise. It was gifted to Rupert G when Dave retired the show. How cool is that? Go to hello-deli.com. Say something nice to Rupert. Get yourself a hat, get yourself a mug, get yourself a Late Show with David Letterman t-shirt. And yeah, let's continue to celebrate this thing that we love so much. This has been another episode of the Letterman Podcast with Mike Chisholm. Coincidentally, I am Mike Chisholm. Thank you and good night.
Overcoat and underpants.